nice to have you here with us. And I know we've got, Mike is getting ready to jump in right now as well. And want to thank everybody for joining us today for the kind of the legal and liability Q&A. It's the follow-up to the 12-step program that we put together. Was that was 2 weeks ago, Cecil? Is that right?
I believe so. Yes, it was.
Okay.
And a couple of sessions that were very productive with a lot of people signed in.
Absolutely. And there's been a lot of follow-up, and I thought that this was a great opportunity for people to kind of corner Mike Porrazzo, also learn from your peers a bit. You know, that's what we really want to make sure we're doing. And a little bit of a couple things that we want to do. There's a Q&A section on the Zoom webinar. If you guys can enter any questions that you have in the Q&A, that way we'll be able to share them with everybody, give some written responses when we can, and that sort of thing. Another housekeeping issue, Cecil, I think your collar is up just a little bit.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
Oh, that's what I'm here for.
Look at that. I was looking at the palm tree in the background and just enjoying the feel of being in Hawaii. Yeah. Right from beautiful downtown Anaheim Hills. So thank you for that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No, I appreciate it. Mike's going to be joining us in just a second here. But while we wait for Mike, I wanted to ask you, Cecil. Cecil, what's the kind of the top thing that you're seeing from school administrators right now? What are you hearing from them?
I would say that the impact of the governor's announcement, which was kind of a partial reclosure of some businesses here in the state, and the announcement of the two largest school districts in the state that they would be doing online learning for the fall, has caused concern for administrators in a number of reasons. One is, it seems the result of some of that is teachers that have contacted them to say, look, I'm not sure that I feel comfortable coming back to school. Not the majority of teachers, but they've been managing that. And just kind of a re-questioning of their plans. Are we doing the right thing? What's the proper way forward in light of the changing environment that we have?
And the big one, you know, about, you know, and I know we're going to get Mike on here in just a second, but I think the biggest question that I'm hearing about right now is whether they're even allowed to. And whether they're allowed to reopen. And I think that the question that we're hearing the most is, can we, does it impact the school if the local school district says no? If the local school district says, hey, we're just doing distance learning, as a Christian educator, are they impacted by that?
So you have to, in your and my minds, because of what we do, there's really two answers to that. When you say impact, you have to decide, am I asking the question, what am I required? Am I permitted to reopen? Is it legally permissible? Right. And the fact that a local school district decides to close does not change the law for a local private school to make their decision. As it is in most parts of the state right now, they are legally permitted. That's why we've been encouraging everybody the last few months. Stay in contact with your local, meaning usually a county public health department. In some cities, they have their own public health department in larger cities. So stay in contact with them. They're going to be kind of your North Star in a sense of what you're permitted to do. So that's one question. The other side of the equation is, how does it impact us in terms of our community support and us staying unified as a school community on whether it's appropriate for us. And those are the kinds of conversations I'm having with administrators since those announcements. And it's causing some upset and disruption in a process that to this point, they've been pretty unified about wanting to be reopened. And still most of our schools are saying that's what they want to do. And they're heading in that direction, but it's complicated the issue, there's no doubt.
Okay. See, what we look at from a liability perspective is, you know, because of, we look at our peers, we look at our similar type organizations in the community and what they're doing. And so it does create more liability. You know, people want to say, hey, is there liability if I'm going to be reopening? And the answer to that is, yeah, you are increasing your liability because you're doing something different than other similar organizations in the community. And because you're doing something different than similar organizations in the community, there is some, and that's why we need to make sure that we have a plan that we're following, that it's well thought out. And I'm looking forward to hearing some of the feedback from people on the 12-step plan that we put together and how that's working out for them. So, Mr. Porrazzo.
Hello, sorry about that. I am present and accounted for.
All right. Well, we've solved it, so we're good. That's a wrap, Mike. You're done.
Okay, good. It's always best when you don't need me. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, but you know what? I just want, on that note, I really don't want people to say, hey, we don't want to spend the money on an attorney right now. And that's one of the questions, or one of the things that we see come up in schools, churches, colleges, that they say, well, we're going to handle this on our own. We don't want to spend the money on the attorney. I think it's wise to get that legal counsel, especially in this time, and to review the things and that you're working on. So, hey, Mike, what Cecil and I were just talking about was how it impacts the private Christian schools. What the local school districts are doing and how that impacts the private Christian schools.
Sure. Well, the local school districts right now are all over the board.
Mm-hmm.
It is impacting schools because there's a certain natural tendency to sort of follow the lead of what local schools are doing. However, it can be virtually impossible. So I know of school districts, or at least counties, for example, in Orange County, that are saying we're not closing the schools, and then the Santa Ana School District said, well, we are closing our schools within Orange County. So there you have the conflict. Which one do you follow, right? Do you follow the Orange County, or do you follow the the lead of the Santa Ana School District? What I will say, as we were discussing before we went online, is that the schools need to have plan A, B, and C ready, as soon as possible, and then communicate that with their school community. For example, it's our desire to open up fully and safely when the first day of school opens. However, we'll be prepared to do distance learning or some kind of hybrid, depending on what the state of the law is at that time. And unfortunately, none of us can really predict what the state of the law is going to be in August or September. We just can't.
I think what people can do is they can say, all right, if we were to reopen school tomorrow, this is what it would look like.
Right.
And that's your plan A, and then plan B and plan C.
Correct.
Okay. And so, Mike, let's forget about Santa Clara County. Not that we want to forget about Santa Clara County. They need Christian education as well. But in Santa Ana, the one that you were just talking about, in Santa Ana, could they reopen tomorrow, open fully, allow everybody to come in, and could they reopen?
They can, certainly.
Okay.
The choice that the Santa Ana Unified School District has made is to close. They're not going to reopen for the fall, but the fall for them is still several weeks away. So they could change, and they could change tomorrow. It's unlikely, because again, right now they're at least using the surge in infections and positive testing of the virus as their basis for the decisions that they're making. And whatever you believe about that data, that's at least what they're publicly stating, and that's what is informing their decisions.
I think a lot of that is driven by the teachers' unions.
Yes.
The teachers' unions are saying, hey, we're not sending our teachers back, and we're refusing to come back, but we don't have that in the Christian school setting. But that brings up the question about, maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit on this, but brings up the question about What if a teacher's afraid and will not come back?
Right. Well, you certainly can't force them to come back. But again, now what's going on within the school districts is that a lot of teachers are saying, well, we're not going to come back for safety reasons, but we want to sit home and get paid. That model doesn't work either. the schools are not, our schools are not going to be able to do that. I wouldn't expect anyone to do that, nor do I think anyone should offer to do that, nor do I think they'll be legally compelled to do so.
Okay. So you're saying if a teacher's aide, administrator, coach, anybody says, okay, I know you're going to reopen the school, but I don't feel comfortable coming back. The first thing is going to be, please accommodate me, and please accommodate maybe it's a disability, maybe it's because of an underlying health issue. And do they first need to accommodate them because of the health issue?
They're not legally required to.
Okay.
No, because again, Christian schools are still exempt from disability discrimination under Cal Government Code 12926D, as well as the the exemptions that are available for religious organizations under Title IX and Title VII on the federal level. So there is no requirement on any of our schools legally to make accommodation for people to stay home. Now there was an interesting, overriding set of laws that were put into place in the early days of COVID back in March, when the governor closed down the state, but made available extended sick leave, and that applied to Christian schools, for teachers who were refusing to come back to school, and that was understandable, and it's still understandable today. But there is not a legal requirement for them to say, okay, well, you can have your class distance learned. Now, a lot of schools may do that anyway as an accommodation, okay? And I think a lot of them, a lot of schools are sort of right now resisting this hybrid approach, having some distance learning, having some on-campus experience. I think while I would feel the same way, I'd be resisting that as well. You may not have a choice, practically speaking. You may very well need to accommodate, if you get enough teachers who are saying, I'm not coming onto campus, you better start thinking about plans B and C.
Okay. So they're not legally required to accommodate them. I'm just trying to kind of nail it down. So they're not legally required to accommodate them. They can choose to do so. And if they do for one, they would have to do that for everybody?
No.
Okay.
Not legally required to accommodate. If you do it for one, you don't have to do it for all. You can discriminate amongst staff that way. Now, those concepts are going to sound very uncomfortable and very foreign to a lot of our listeners. Okay, but that is the benefit of the law as it applies to religious organizations in the state of California. Now, again, there may be lots of different variations on those for certain circumstances. So, just the lawyer in me is reluctant to make broad sweeping statements, but for the most part, no, you do not have to accommodate. And what you do for one teacher, you don't have to do for all.
And let me interject that that's not something that's answered by the law firm of, Google and Bing. That's one where you need some help.
Yes.
Where you need to have an attorney that's going to guide you through it, because there are nuances on that. There's not a legal Zoom, form letter on that. There are really unique things that you need to consider, and I'd get somebody experienced to kind of guide you through that.
Sure. I occasionally rely on the law firm of Google and Bing, but only for some entertainment value. All right.
Okay. All right. Good. So then one of the questions that we have that's been coming in a lot, and Cecil, the answer to this one: masks or no masks?
Tell you, this is one of the divisive issues of the day. And we are telling all of our school leaders to stay in close contact with their local health departments, because they do have the authority, legal authority, to close you down as a business. They can do that with any business in their purview. Whereas the governor's guidelines, the state superintendent of public instruction's guidelines, and to a certain degree, the CDC guidelines have been generally vague to issues. They have typically said that that is on purpose to allow local health leaders to give them the discretion on giving specific direction about mask and social distancing requirements and those kinds of things. The bottom line is it's mixed up across the board on what is being required locally. It's going to be very important for school leaders to stay in contact. The governor's order from a week ago basically said that if you're indoors, you should have a mask on. We have lots of school leaders that are planning on when students are in a situation on their campus and they can be appropriately social distance, they're not going to require a mask. But when a student or a staff member is in a situation where they cannot maintain that social distance, they will be required to wear a mask on campus to try to keep everybody safe. So in a hallway, coming in and out of a classroom, coming in and out of another building, they'll put their mask on. And in other settings, they're in a gymnasium, a building, even a classroom building that's been reconfigured to allow for the social distancing. In those situations, many administrators are telling me they're not going to require a mask in that specific kind of a setting. That's generally what I'm hearing.
So masks while walking around, masks in the hallways, masks going into the classroom. But if you're in the classroom and you've got, 6 feet or so in between kids, then no masks.
That's what we're hearing. People are the ones that they're planning on being in their school this fall.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of plans I'm hearing overwhelmingly. Now, I will tell you, there are folks on the other side that are saying, no, we want our staff and our students to always wear masks. And there's some that feel, for their reasons, the school leader and the school community feel strongly they shouldn't wear a mask. We do have school leaders that are making those choices as well. But the predominant one is mask when you're not socially distanced, not mask when you are able to social distance. That's the most common thing I'm hearing.
Now, Mike, that brings up the point about the current order right now that says when you're indoors, if you're in a public space in California, Governor Newsom has said everybody's got to wear a mask. So as long as there is that mandate to have a mask on when you're indoors, do they all need to be wearing a mask at this point? But once that's lifted, then they can go to the, hey, we're in classroom, no mask.
Well, that's the order from the governor.
Okay.
So my answer to that would be yes. Okay. That does have the force and effect of law. Whether I think the courts are correct in how they've addressed that to this point, they have said that the governor's orders have the force and effect of law, particularly as it relates to religious organizations. And he also shut down churches and has now yet again shut down indoor church meetings. That's been decided in the courts. So they have ruled the governor's powers plenary under emergency order authority, and so that's what we're living with. What I also feel somewhat compelled to say is, at least for Orange County, we have a sheriff who is saying in Orange County he's not going to enforce those orders. So what I would tell our schools, at least in Orange County, is proceed at your own risk. I don't think the governor is going to send in state troopers in California, and there aren't enough of them anyway. California is interesting in that regard in terms of how many purely state troopers they have available to enforce statewide actions. But at least for Orange County, they have said they're not going to enforce. Now, the interesting thing is, again, just using Orange County as an example, Your county may be different, but what would the Orange County Public Health Department do? And would their actions have the force of law? The answer to that is yes. And they may very well close schools or require masks indoors at a county level as well. And then the question is, would Sheriff Barnes be required to enforce a local Orange County public health order to require masks in schools once schools in Orange County are reopened? And again, I hate to say it, but the answer to that question is right now, today, we don't know.
Okay. You know, I want to point people back to that 12-step plan that we'd put together, because again, use that as your model, because it does allow for this flexibility during certain times. And by communicating with folks and saying, hey, we will be open this year, you know, theoretically, with no restrictions. Everybody comes in because there's, you know, it's cured and whatnot. You know, that's where we want to get to, but there are steps that it's going to take to get there. And I think that 12-step plan does give you that flexibility throughout the year, and it gives you the plan that you can develop. Okay, so now we've done everything, Mike, right? We've got our plan in place. We've got we're sanitizing the whole facility. We're doing all of that stuff. And then there's an outbreak. And a child, you get a report that, you know, little Susie was at school on Monday. She wasn't feeling well on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, she gets test results back, and the test results back come out positive. And how is the school supposed to respond to little Susie having been in class during a time that she was, you know, may have been contagious?
Well, in that particular hypothetical, Charlie, and I just got asked this question before we came on. Mm-hmm. You said two things. You said we have an outbreak, little Susie got sick. Those aren't the same.
Okay.
If little Susie gets sick, she goes home, she isolates for 2 weeks, and school goes on. Depending on how little Susie is, she is an extremely unlikely vector for transmission of the disease. And in all likelihood, she's not going to exhibit any symptoms. She is not going to transmit it to anyone else. And she's going to be fine in a few days, even though I think best practices would be to keep Susie home for 2 weeks, but school operates as normal, just like it would if Susie had the flu. Okay? And the call that came to me this morning was from an administrator who, you know, in a summer program, an athletic summer program, had one of the athletes, a young teenager, come down with COVID. And the school shut down the whole summer athletic program because of that. I think that was an overreaction, but I understand it. Parents got spooked, and so did the kids. But again, you know, we're still at the same place where, as of today, there are 0 deaths age 0 to 17 in California. I misspoke last webinar and I said through age 24. Okay. But the fact of the matter is that people between 0 and 50 are still unlikely to test positive for it. And if they do, the symptoms are going to be mild for the most part. The mortality rates are still in the 0.0, you know, followed by some low number percentage. A lot of the data that we're hearing about the surge is at best untrustworthy, and it is at worst intentionally deceptive.
Well, we won't get into that too much on the numbers, but we've got to look at the data, and you know. But I'll tell you the one thing is that you talk about is the number of kids 0 to 17. The link, there's a live link in that 12-step plan that will take you to the Public Health Department of the state of California that will show you those numbers. And so, Mike, you're absolutely right that we aren't seeing it in kids. We saw the study with the child care facilities that remained open. and that they had very low transmission rates, and those work very well. And that's kind of what we modeled the plan about. So, okay, little Susie's sick, stay home for 14 days, right? Now,
Right.
what about when the entire offensive line for your football team, or, you got a group of kids, that they've been part of a group, and you got a percent, let's say a quarter of the kids in the classroom, God forbid it happens, and you got a quarter of kids in one class that all test positive. How do we handle something like that?
Yeah.
Same way?
You know what? Here's the best answer I can give you, Charlie, and that is you got to cross that bridge when you come to it.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think you can. I can't take a hypothetical that broad and say, what do you do? If you have the entire offensive line of a football team, well, if you're at and I will mention now the name of a particular school. If you're Valley Christian School in San Jose, well, you've got 50, 60, 70 guys on your football team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It may be something where those 5 offensive linemen got it at a party that they were at that none of the other football players were at.
Sure.
And it may be in that situation that you isolate those 5 kids and you carry on with the football program.
Yeah.
At some of our other schools where they do have a football program and they're lucky to get 15 to 20 players to actually commit for the season, but 5 of them get it, you may have to shut that program down.
But let's say it's a large portion of the classroom then. Is it just, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if it's a large, go to the classroom, it's a large portion. And it's just one of those things you're going to have to, evaluate that situation when it comes to play. Is that
Right.
something where you call the local public health authority and ask them as well?
Yeah, I think that's something where you bring in doctors, the local public health authority, as well as parents and teachers. That's where, and one of the things we talked about in terms of both the strategy as well as the 12-point program was having a team that schools organize right now to deal with those kinds of issues when they come up. And by the way, if schools open in the fall, people within the community are going to test positive for COVID-19.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. Okay, so even as strident as I've been about, on balance, the issue of opening versus non-opening is a risk assessment issue, and the risk of opening the school is modest to sickness. Kids or teachers are going to get it. That's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
If those instances of acquiring COVID-19 are isolated, in other words, a teacher comes down with it, a student comes down with it, that's where isolation, 14 days, stay home, comes into play. But you don't shut down the whole school when that happens because one person's come down with the disease. Now, if some in a classroom, and that's where we talked last time in our last webinar about cohorting, some in a classroom come down with it, you may have to quarantine that classroom. That sounds to me like the initial appropriate response. But if that classroom has been fairly well, if you will, cohorted, you may not need to shut down the whole school when that happens. But again, we're going to have to deal with those things on a case-by-case basis as they come up.
I want to share with you one preschool that I work with where a couple of teachers came down with it. One came down with it and 2 others were exposed. And they contacted licensing, and licensing said, close both of those classrooms for 2 weeks and do not allow those kids to come back for 2 weeks. And and they lost out on that revenue as well. So it's a possibility. It's happening sometimes. Sure. But you do need to communicate with licensing. You do need to communicate with public health authorities.
Yeah, and Charlie, even that response from licensing is encouraging to me. So in other words, they didn't say shut down the whole school. Mm-mm. They kind of isolated those classrooms and said, let's go those folks out of the community for a couple weeks and let them get healthy, or at least to the point where they're not at risk of spreading.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to, I'm seeing the questions sort of start to accumulate. Do you want to start?
Sure, I'll run through some of these. Cecil, this one came to you. It says, does the local California licensing guidelines for preschool override local health authority in regards to masks? So licensing
Yes.
says one thing. Oh, so licensing overrides?
For preschools and
Okay.
licensed child care programs that are supervised by community care licensing, which is a state of California oversight group that it's administered at the county level. So and everybody that runs one of those programs will know what community care licensing is. They will be the ultimate question. They'll give you the guidance, and they're very hands-on is the best way to say it. So you work with that group. For all others, those are the ones that we're giving guidance to look at your local health board, your local health agency. Usually that is a county health office. Sometimes in a larger city, the city will have an office of public health. So that's going to be the groups that will guide you, and their rules really do have the force of law, as Mike has explained. Got to follow what they tell you.
Okay. All right, cool. Mike, why don't we let you get to some of the questions if you would like to see us kind of going through those now.
Yeah, I'm taking a look at them, and I've got a couple. I've got a couple on a webinar chat and some just on Q&A. So let me start with this webinar chat. Jim Copeland has asked a couple of questions and made a couple of comments. And Jim, you're correct. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act does require that paid sick leave for full-time employees and up to 12 weeks for the Family Medical Leave Act. The only issue there is that will have to be analyzed with regard to each person who it might apply to now, because some of them may have taken advantage of all of that back in March, and you may not have any more benefits under that now if they took advantage of it in March. So I'd have to know the background of any particular question on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Let me get to the Q&As, and I'll probably take people that I recognize. Aloha to Sandra Butler from Hawaii. Does it apply to Hawaii law as well? And Sandra, the answer to that question is I don't know. Hawaii, of course, has been particularly conservative in their approach to it in restricting businesses and openings and even travel inter-island. So I have to find out on that one. Marilyn Davidson writes, so do I fire the teacher who doesn't come back so they can get unemployment? The answer to that question is maybe yes. Okay. But again, I'd have to know what the circumstances are, but it may be a benefit to them to actually have their employment terminated so that they can collect unemployment. Unfortunately, a lot of our member schools are affiliated with churches, and a lot of schools and churches voluntarily are not participating in the unemployment program. So again, I'd have to know whether you participate in unemployment or not. From anonymous attendee, we have many public schools around our private district that are going to do online distance learning for at least the first month to first semester at this point. Should we be following the same plan that they are? And the answer to that question is, if you have, in my opinion, if you have the freedom to open, I'm suggesting you can at low risk. That's what we talked about the first two webinars, okay? But clearly, if you follow the lead of the public schools and you do distance learning and your parents are okay with that, that represents in pure legal terms or risk terms, the lowest possible risk, right? If you do distance learning, it's clearly low risk. Not sure how many of your parents will sign up to pay for that, but certainly that's low risk. If again, you got to be careful how I say this, but I'll just say it. If I was running a public or a private school and I was legally able to reopen, I would do so. The concept of physical distances, I'm sorry, from anonymous attendee. The concept of physical distancing is difficult to nail down. Is there any specific guidance about required distance between desks, preschool students napping when in the classroom? Here's what I've seen. Of course, I think we're all pretty much indoctrinated with the idea that physical distancing is 6 feet. I've actually seen other studies that have said, hey, 3 feet is plenty. That might make a big difference in terms of how many people you can get into a classroom. It would clearly make a difference beneficially to our private schools. So there is actually some data that you could rely on to try to physical distance within about 3 feet. I think what we've put together in this 12-point plan is to practice physical distancing where it's practical to do so. But otherwise, you understand, you're not going to get 2-year-olds in a preschool setting to physical distance. That's not going to happen. And there's no risk of not physical distancing. Okay. Again, a question about cohorting, which came up last time. What is a reasonable size of a cohort? What we were intending to communicate with the cohorting part of the 12-point plan was that a cohort would be a typical classroom. Like, so for example, a 3rd grade cohort might be 20 kids, might be 25 kids, hopefully not much bigger than that. But a 3rd grade cohort would have those kids try to stay together during the school day as much as possible and not mix, whether with the 4th grade class, the 2nd grade class, or up the line to schools that go K through 8 or K through 12. That's the idea of cohorting. And so the question goes on, could 2 sections of a 1st grade class be considered a cohort? Yes, but then once you get up to, say, 2 sections, if that may be 40 or 50 kids, that's getting pretty big and somewhat may defeat the purpose of trying to do social distancing where practical. Okay. And then here's a good question from Daniel Daling. What about requirements of notifying school stakeholders of a positive COVID student? I think it is absolutely necessary that everybody in the community would be advised when someone in the community is tested positive for COVID. The interesting issue is, do you actually state their name? And that's something that everybody is grappling with. And that may get into, other issues about contact tracing and those kinds of things. But I think for now, the legal issue is balancing privacy versus public safety. And I think public safety on that would win. I would be in favor of being able to name names when it comes to people who have tested positive. And so, because that person is going to be removed from the community anyway. They're going to be told to go home, isolate, and remain isolated for 14 days. People are going to know who it is. And again, why wouldn't you state the name? Well, because of privacy, and I understand that. And privacy is a constitutionally held First Amendment right now. But I think privacy gives way to public safety within the school community. Okay.
On that note, would you
Sure.
ask the parents first?
Yes, we of course would ask the parents first. And quite frankly, I think in preparation for school opening, what I would also do is I would ask parents to sign a privacy release on that, just like they would with pictures being taken that you might post to school social media sites of kids attending a picnic or a barbecue, or parents going to a fundraiser where you have a photographer at the event. It's the same thing. You release and consent to that kind of public information, especially where it comes to testing positive for COVID, so that other parents and other families can know, hey, this kid was tested positive. We were exposed to them. We had them over our house for a gathering, within the last 3 days. Maybe we should get tested. That seems to me to be reasonable, and I just don't think that privacy ought to win out in that balancing act between privacy and community health.
I think that's a great idea to have that as part of your contact tracing program, that you're telling everybody beforehand that if your child contracts it, then we're going to let everybody know that, little Cecil came down with it, and he's going to be out for 2 weeks. And I think that's a good idea. But
yeah, and I'm seeing two other comments on the Q&A, again by Sandra Butler, Aloha, and Matt Connerth. Germany uses 1.5 meters. That's 4.3 feet for social distancing. And I'm just using that as another comment. So a lot of schools all across the European Union have already reopened, and they are not experiencing any uptick whatsoever in COVID-19 positive testing, with one exception, and that is for some interesting reason that I have not fully researched, but in Israel, they have had some increased positive testing among students. I don't know why that is the case, but throughout the European Union, those schools who have reopened, they are doing so wonderfully and without any surge in positive COVID-19 testing. Okay, and Sandra points out the American Pediatric Association is saying 3 feet unless facing each other. So there you go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Jennifer Fry says, can students from differing classes play outside together during a recess? I think the consensus on the data is outside is good. Playing is good. Okay, and there you go. I think they could, I think they can certainly do so. I think that's a low risk. Matt again writes, if, for example, local LA County Health Department explicitly says 6 feet is required indoors, can we opt to reduce the distance without being shut down? Matt, I think under those circumstances, you're doing so at some risk. If it's the health department, they can come in, they can send an inspector out, and they can tell you either comply with a 6 foot rule or we'll shut you down. And I think at that point, when you've got a local health inspector on the premises at your school and they're telling you do this or else, the answer to that is we'll do that. Okay. Let's see here. What if a family member of a child tests positive? Does that child only stay home for 2 weeks? That's from Kathleen Winslow. I think that's a good idea. Yeah, so the child doesn't have it, but a family member, mom or dad or sibling has it. I would say that family, that child should probably go home for 2 weeks and isolate.
Hey, Mike, I see a question that's come up a couple of times here about release of liability agreements or hold harmless agreements, specifically addressing COVID. First of all, what's your thought on that? And Cecil, what have you been seeing on that in schools?
Charlie, I'm sorry, as you were saying that, we just got information from Dr. Susie Moeller from our office that just shared something, since we're talking about physical distancing and those kind of requirements, that community care licensing has released a pen notice today removing the lower teacher-child ratio restrictions and allowing early education programs to go back to 1 to 12. So that's a brand new breaking development, and I just asked her to clarify that that's for the entire state of California, not just one county community care licensing office. So we'll
look at that. You heard it. You heard it here first. Cecil,
thank you, Dr. Moeller. Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Moeller, thank you for that.
If it's coming from Susie Moeller, you can trust it too. Thank you, Susie.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So Cecil, are you having schools talk to you about release of liability agreements when it comes to COVID?
Yes, many of them. That's an important question. We talked about this at our last last gathering with the three of us. Mike explained that in some cases they're really not a valuable thing for children and also for staff members because it's a workers' compensation situation for your staff. We also did, as a over the top of that discussion, though, say sometimes the value of communicating what your plans are, what you're going to be doing. If it ends up looking like a liability release, it may not have legal effect in a court situation, but the process of being clear in your communication about your planning, what your expectations are, is a positive thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Cecil. Thank you. And we'll be preparing. I'm still working on a draft for our liability release that we'll make available to all of our member schools, whether on this platform or some other at no charge. That liability release will be for parents and students and their families, not for employees. And I'm sorry if that might have been confusing from last time. It is not a good practice, nor would it be legal to ask for employees to release their rights to make a workers' compensation claim or whatever it might be. We're not asking schools to do that, but there certainly have to be all of the appropriate disclaimers to all the employees, that there is risk to coming back to school if you reopen the campus, as if anybody wouldn't know that already, even if you have been living under a rock for the last 6 months. Okay.
All right, Mike, I'll keep letting you hit those Q&As. I think you're nailing them pretty good.
Well, trying to. Let's see here. I'll go back up this way. Our county health director sent out a notice recommending schools go to distance learning because a spike in COVID. All the public schools follow the recommendation. I'm assuming we have a right to stay open under our comprehensive plan. Thoughts? That's from Ron Hiddle. Ron, the answer is yes. Okay. If the county health department is saying they are recommending all schools go to distance learning, that's exactly what it is. And I suspect everybody will do that. I mean, again, none of us can predict the future, but that's the only safe and legal, legally safe way for counties and government officials to operate. It's easy to say, don't gather together, right? That takes all the liability off of them. But if it's just a recommendation, then then private schools are certainly free to reopen and to do so, in the safest way possible. Okay.
Mike, while you're looking for the next comment you want to address, I was just going to add, because
Sure.
Dr. Moeller, thank you, Susie, so much. If there are early ed leaders on the line with us, that PIN number that Dr. Moeller shared with us is PIN 20-15-CCP. It was issued today. It is, that's for the entire state of California. She did add a little footnote on here. All of our experiences with community care licensing is the rules are the same, but sometimes those get interpreted differently by different county offices of community care licensing.
Right. And by different county officers, whoever
Yes,
it is on that
exactly.
day, who comes out to your school, they are the law,
Yes,
So,
that's right.
so anyway, but that is an extremely encouraging development. And just staying on the early education sort of preschool angle, Kenneth Ratton writes, our church operates a preschool, not grade school. Am I wrong to think of our operation as similar to the ongoing daycare for children of essential workers, but now extended to support all of the families that are back at work? It seems to me that we have an okay from the state to be open. And the answer to that question is yes, because those child care facilities are an essential business, okay? And they are not right now subject to lockdowns, and I don't think they will be, okay? So again, when we say schools need to be flexible, there may even need to be, bifurcations or trifurcations made for schools' approach to reopening. One for preschool, one for elementary school, one for junior high, another one for high school. Hate to say to have, not only plan A, B, and C sort of thought of at least now, but you may need to have plan A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3. If you are a large school that goes all the way from EE up to 12th grade. Okay, that's from Kenneth. Thanks for pointing that out. Let's see here. And I think I've tried to run through most of the question and tried to synthesize the duplicates. If we don't qualify for FFRCA because we closed on 3/18/20, that's from Robin Horton. Robin, that was the day before the governor's shutdown on March 19th. We don't qualify for FFRCA because we closed on 3/18. If we have a teacher who says, I'm not comfortable, plus I have children now not in school, what are our options since we don't qualify for unemployment as nonprofit? Robin, that's a pretty specific fact setting that I'm guessing may not apply to very many schools. Why don't you give me a call? Initial consultation is at no charge. I'd be happy to talk with you further about your specific situation. Okay, and I think that brings us pretty much up to speed on the Q&As. Okay.
Hey, let me ask you this one. I see one that came up here. It says, we've created our 12-step plan using the plan that we put together as guidance. May I ask, should we make this available to the families or post it on the website? What's your thought on that?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think so, Charlie. I do believe that for families who have put their kids in Christian schools, I think they're smart people who have made wise choices. I do. And I trust the intelligence and the perspective of our member communities, and would absolutely ask for their input on what we're doing. If we don't have, to borrow again a political phrase, if we don't operate with the consent of the governed, what are we doing? We want to be able to reopen schools in a way that families are safe, where their voices are heard, where they have input, and they feel as though their needs and concerns are being addressed. So I would absolutely make those programs public and give families, especially now before school opens, every right to speak into it. Doesn't mean that every opinion is going to be, grafted into the draft plan, but it does mean that people have a voice, and that they are able to give input into whatever a school is trying to do, which is far different from public schools and really how a lot of local schools are treating private schools. So for example, again, not to pick on Santa Clara County, I mean, I lived in Santa Clara County virtually my whole life before moving down to Southern California 20 years ago. But when the Santa Clara County Board of Education decided that they were going to go distance learning, and the public health department ordered that for both public and private schools, before they ordered it, they gave no input to private schools. Nobody knew that they were going to do that. It came out of the blue as far as private schools were concerned. And that just strikes the fundamental fairness and due process, frankly, not to get overly legal about it, but they took no input into that decision, certainly not from the private schools. They just laid it out there a few weeks back, and it's like, you live with it. Sorry, that's tough. I don't think, by the way, of the 58 counties in California, I don't think they're the only county that's going to do that, but we'll see.
So regarding that plan, it's okay to post it. It's a good idea to post it, present it to folks, let them know.
I would not only recommend it, I would encourage it.
Yeah, and that it's a living document. It's something that's going to be developed and maintained and monitored over the years. But I also think prior to doing that, once you've got it
over weeks and months, not years. Okay. Yeah.
But before you do that, I would encourage you to have an attorney review it. I know a guy, Mike, but I would encourage you to have somebody review it for you, and because that is going to help release some of the liability.
I think so too, and I would be remiss if I didn't make one other mention, Charlie, just because you said years. I responded, hopefully weeks or months. Mm-hmm. Moderna has announced that they are now going into phase 2 clinical trials for a very promising vaccine that is producing the antibody to fight COVID-19. AstraZeneca over in partnership with a German pharmaceutical They are now in a phase 2 clinical trial with 30,000 people that are going to be participating in a vaccine. And they are on a race in a program that is the outgrowth of the administration's warp speed program to develop a vaccine for coronavirus now by year's end. And while we, again, don't know the future or how these things are going, those are just 2 of 200 biopharmaceutical companies who are working on a vaccine. And with that much competition, that much intensity, and that much sort of in it for them to come up with something from a financial and profit incentive, you know, we're going to have something on the vaccine end, as well as therapeutics continuing to develop. There are daily bits of good news on the scientific, biological, and pharmaceutical front. But you know what? You don't hear a lot about that either. All you hear about is surges in cases, and that information may or may not be true. And again, not to be political, but the news feeds that I am getting all are pointing in the same direction. There is furiously intense work being done that is extremely promising on the vaccine front for COVID-19.
Okay, let's see. Did we get to all the Q&As here? I think we've gotten to most of them. Is that right? Physical distancing. Sorry, just want to make sure, Mike, that we're getting to everybody's questions.
And here, here's a more recent one, again from anonymous attendee. Can you please share your thoughts on how aggressive a school should be with enforcing mask policy? Thoughts on recommendations versus requiring students comply with the order. Like Orange County, our sheriff's department is not enforcing our health department orders. How much legal responsibility does the school have in enforcing compliance to an order while staff and students are on school property? Okay. Again, you'll see in our 12-step program, we're not recommending masks be required. For those who are comfortable in wearing them, certainly they should have that option, but it's not required. And still it remains that we have received nothing but mixed messages, not only from the administration, but from all kinds of public health officials, doctors, etc., who are giving us mixed signals on whether masks are effective in lowering the transmission of COVID-19. We just don't know.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I caught a couple here that came up in the chat, not in the Q&A. So this is a question really defining indoor church services. This is more on the church side, but it says, what does it mean that indoor church meetings are shut down? Does this mean that a church cannot have a pastor and a few people around to conduct online church? So, you know, it used to be that you could have 10, you know, that was the original shutdown order before May 31st. And then now they've said, shut it down. Have you seen any clear definition on that?
No, but I believe that the order would permit some kind of, if you will, an online setting to have more than one person leading that service, so long as they were, you know, 6 feet apart from each other. I don't think that would be a problem.
Okay. Okay. Let's see, we had another question about where the 12-step plan is available. If you go to churchwest.com, it's available there. There's also a recording of the webinar that we had there. There was a, you know, Cecil, you turned me on to something that was kind of an app for people to use to do like a screening app. I didn't see that. I saw a Word document where you could kind of create a Google document. Is there an actual thing yet?
Yeah, the app had to do with, we were discussing how are we going to, if one of the guidelines for this is going to be, we want to take kids' temperatures when they're coming to school. How do you manage that process? So the app was having to do with that process, how a student you could use a Bluetooth thermometer, hold it up as a green, yellow, or a red indicator to staff as they're walking by. The other piece of information where you're having parents kind of self-certify every day among a handful of different things, temperature being one of those, That was just a Google spreadsheet. And so I think we posted those last time, both the name of it, but if not, I'm going to ask Katie Diaz, who's on here, to post that information in the Q&A so that everybody would like that and see both of that. The Google spreadsheet was just a document for internal tracking. It's not public information, right? It's internal tracking. The other app was a Bluetooth thermometer app.
Okay, cool.
Hey, I would add, Charlie, while we're talking about it, and this is not to conflict, we have somebody who's gone to law school, graduated, and passed the California bar, which is no small feat, in Mike Porrazzo, and has dozens of Christian school clients and put together a great plan. I think Mike would agree that if you choose to, and you want to be a little bit more conservative than what is required of you lawfully, that is permissible to you. If in your school community, I'm not sure that there are any that are going to feel better about masks, or, there could be some schools where the communities really would embrace that and want it, that is okay for a school administrator to implement that and to walk through it. This is another good reason to have Mike look at whatever your plan is, this 12-step plan, however you customize it. Get that in front of an attorney so somebody like Mike can look at it, give you guidance on it. There may be adjustments that need to be made for your setting. That the plan is designed, the 12-step plan that Mike and Charlie have worked on, and Mike's taken the lead on, is designed to meet the full requirement of the law and operate safely. That doesn't mean that every school community, they may have some differences about them where they feel like being more restrictive or a little bit more careful. And I think we would all say that that's okay, as long as you're not conflicting the law in some way.
Okay, I agree. So, all right, I think we've gotten the most here. Guys, I really appreciate both of you taking the time.
There is one more, Charlie. I'm sorry, just because it came so. There's some energy behind it. It's from Julie. To all panelists on the webinar chat, Julie says, very dangerous. And then she was asked what specifically, and her response was promoting the vaccine, especially Moderna. I just happened to mention them, Julie, because they have been approved and are in, I believe, phase 2 clinical trials, which means that's moving along because their initial trials and initial testing of that potential vaccine was promising. I'm not promoting anything. I'm not in a position to, if you will, promote any vaccine. What I did say, just to clarify, there are over 200 companies right now racing to find a vaccine, and there are billions of dollars from the administration that are being made available for those companies that are participating in Operation Warp Speed to come up with a vaccine. And it is looking very promising that a vaccine will be available, perhaps even as early as the end of this year, which is by the way at warp speed, but is not completely outside of the realm of possibility. Even early on in the virus, when they said, well, eventually they're going to come up with a vaccine. And at that point, back in March, you'll recall, it was a 12 to 18 month sort of time frame for this. And what we were trying to do originally with the orders was to, quote, flatten the curve. Do you all remember that? The idea was not to eliminate the disease, but the shutdowns were designed to flatten the curve and push forward the positive testing so that vaccines and therapeutics could be developed. Okay, that was the original idea of a lot of the shutdown orders, including, what we saw in California and in other jurisdictions prior to that. So it's not a promotion, but it is some good news. There is good news that is being developed on both the therapeutic and the vaccine and in the science and data end of things. Okay, that's all.
So really, those are more Porrazzo's stock tips, right?
Well, Moderna was up sharply yesterday, down a little bit today. So who knows who's going to come up with it? And it wouldn't surprise me, Charlie, if it's going to be a biopharmaceutical company somewhere other than the U.S. That is possible, which is why it's interesting that AstraZeneca is working in cooperation and partnership with these German companies that are going through these through the 30,000 person clinical trial coming up here within the next couple of weeks. That trial is going to start.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's going to be a Russian company. They seem to be gathering everybody's data. That was the news leak this morning, that they've hacked into everybody's systems and they're going to figure it out and at the same time release Hillary's emails. So kind of do both.
If it's good scientific information, I don't think we mind anybody stealing anything. Okay, everybody's together towards it, so not a problem.
Okay. Awesome. Hey, yeah. Hey guys, Mike, thank you very much. Really appreciate you taking the time, all the effort, and working with me on this, on the 12-step plan.
Thank you.
Sure.
Cecil, appreciate the how you serve the schools, and really appreciate you very, very much. So, guys, thank you. Churches, schools,
I hope. And I would hope, Charlie, to be back in a couple of weeks, again in the same format, and that in a couple of weeks, let's hope and pray we have some good news on the scientific biological end, okay? And that may translate into, getting our schools open come the first day of school.
Sure. Hey, let me just say one thing. I'm going to give myself a quick laundry list of things that we'll do. We're going to send a rebroadcast of this video out to everybody in case you want to share it with anybody on your within your school or on your board. Cecil, we're going to look for that app. Is that right?
Yes, I believe Katie Diaz is on the line, and I hope it's going to show up in our Q&A that people can access here.
Okay, and if not, I'll send it out with the broadcast. It takes me a little while to get it up and converted, and so it's watchable, but usually in the evening or first thing in the morning, we should be able to get that out. We'll also send something out to the 12-step plan, another link to that 12-step plan, because it looks like some folks have missed it, and the previous webinar that we've done. And, guys, we're going to be looking at some of the release forms and kind of that contact tracing that we discussed about providing permission so that when a child gets sick, that you can share that specific child's information with everyone. That sound good?
Thank you, Charlie.
That sounds good. All right, guys. Hey, thank you very much. Guys, schools, we appreciate you. Looking forward to you reopening this fall. We're praying for you, and we're praying for the safety of all, and for one of your vaccines too, Mike, and your stock picks.
Yeah.
All right?
Right. Those are free of charge, okay?
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, everybody.
Right, bye-bye.